So as you are very well aware, this is not the usual setting. You don't see my usual background. I would very much prefer giving this shiur from Yerushalayim, as we do every week, but I happen not to be in Yerushalayim. I'm sitting in Manhattan in a business office. I did not ask permission from my host to do a promo, so I'm not going to tell you which office I'm sitting in, but I'm sitting together with an unbelievable, wonderful group of young professionals, businessmen that left their offices and they just came in to hear a shiur. So these are beautiful people, and it's a privilege to know people like this in America. So I'm taking advantage of this conference room. So this week is Parshat Chukas, and the topic we will be discussing is so relevant and so fascinating, Dina de Malchusa Dina. And the connection to the week's Parsha is twofold, Vayish Memeni Sheri, and at the end of the Parsha, we learn about Melchemes Sichoin, Gittin Lamed Chesed Aleph. The Gemara says, Amon Amayav Teharu B'Sichoin. Actually, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu, you do not fight Amon Amayav. They are beyond boundaries. You do not fight them. But Sichon conquered Amon Amayav. It is no longer considered Amon Amayav. And then Bnei Yisrael fought Sichon and they conquered their lands. So these two sources give legitimacy to Kibish Milchama. And in a way, that is associated with Dina de Malchusa Dina. But today, we're not going to talk about Kibish Milchama, but rather about the more practical aspect and the halacha. Dina de Malchusa Dina. And as we do with every sugya, first we deal with the definitions and the fundamentals, and then with some practical implications and applications, the practicality of this halacha, Dina de Malchusa Dina. Some achronim, including the Kovner of the Dvar Avraham, bring 5 different opinions about Dina de Malchusa, and I think that's a mistake. I think fundamentally there are 2 fundamental basic approaches. How do we understand Dina de Malchusa Dina? So this sugi appears through different sources in Shas, Baba Kam, and Edom Chav Ches, Baba Basan, Nun Dalet. So the Rashman Daran, the Doram Chav Ches and Aleph say, Dina de Malchusa Dina is because the land belongs to the king. And if the land belongs to the king, he is the one to dictate what are the conditions in which you are allowed to live in the land. It's the same as a person that has his private house and somebody wants to be his guest. It goes without saying, the balabos of the house is the one to dictate to his guests what are the conditions. You know, you're in my house, you need to act in accordance to my will. So the land belongs to the king, and therefore the king has the privilege and the authority to dictate to the people living in his land what are the rules. And therefore the Rashba and the Ran Lishitosam are mechadish. In Eretz Yisrael, there's no Dina de Malchusa Dina, because other lands belong to the kings. Eretz Yisrael doesn't belong to a king. It belongs to every Jew in the world. Everybody has part of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore we don't say Dina de Malchusa Dina. So many in Eretz Yisrael would prefer to pass in accordance to the Rashba and Daran and say, well, we're living in Eretz Yisrael, no Dina de Malchusa Dina. But that's not right, because this opinion is not brought in Tur. It's not brought in Shulchan Aruch. It's not in the Rambam. And in the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur. And all other places can be equal, saying in their footsteps, Dina de Malchusa Dina applies to Eretz Yisrael as well as it does to any other country in the world. The other opinion, defining Dina de Malchusa Dina, is the Rashbam, Bava Basnu and Dalad Beis, Tumas Adesh and Shin Mem Aleph. It is based on the consent of the people. When we live in a land, we assume that we live in a land and we take upon ourselves the authority of the government. So it's based on the consent. Al menas kein adate de'och, we live in a land taking upon ourselves the authority of the government. We enjoy the benefits, the plenty, the fruit of the land. So it goes without saying, we take upon ourselves the authority of the king, of the government, or whoever it may be. Seems to be the opinion of the Rambam as well, because the Rambam in Hilchos Ksela, Perikei Halacha Yud Ches says, it is only a legitimate king that has the authority of Dina de Malchus Dina. But if he's cruel, if he isn't fair, then the Rambam defines it Gazlenusa de Malchusa, Chamsenusa de Malchusa. That is not a din. Needs to be fair, needs to be just. So the Rambam also seems to agree that it is based on the consent of the people, but it's mefurish in Trumas Hadeshen and in Reshbam. The nafkamu would be, as we are very well aware, there are democratic countries and societies in today's world, and there's a lot of tyranny in the world and dictators. So when a dictator rules a country, do we say Dina de Malchus Dina? According to the Reshbam and Trumas Hadeshen, probably not, because usually these people don't have the consent of the people. They don't care about the consent of the people. But according to the Rashba and the Ran, if we say, well, the land is mine, and therefore I set the conditions, maybe even in a dictatorial system, the halach of Dina de Malchus would still apply. So this seems to be a machlokes in the Rishonim. Or Zerua, Baba Kamatov Mem Zayin. And his son follows in his footsteps, and that's Chukas Marach or Zerua Simen Kufyu, Reb Chaim Zerua. And they say, Dina de Malchus Dina does not apply only to a legitimate government, not to a conqueror. If you conquer a country, your din is not legitimate. On the other hand, Shuvah said about Chelik Gimel Sementov Kuf Lamed Gimel clearly says, Kibush Melchama and Dina de Malchus are the same. And I actually started today's Shiur quoting two sources in this weekly Parshat which deal with Kibush Melchama. According to the Radbaz, that is the same concept as Dina de Malchus Dina. So Minchas Sosha, I wrote a totally new approach, a new interpretation of Dina de Malchus Dina. I think it's Toras Emes, but I am totally subjective. Most of the things I say, I think, are Toras Emes, but it is for others to judge. Lanius Daiti, Dina de Malchus Dina really needs no explanation. It is the essence of Malchus. So in the modern Western world today, there are kings and monarchs that are totally ceremonial. They don't really have power and authority. Great Britain, Denmark, Sweden, I'm not up to date, but I think in most of these countries, there is a royal family, but they have no authority. There's an elected government, prime minister. He has the authority. And the king is more ceremonial. Kings are usually to boost tourism and bring revenue and money into the country. They have some functions, but not real authority. But Malchus be Yisrael, soim tosim olecho melech shetei eimosoi elecho. Amos Malchus is because of authority, because the melech has power. He could punish, he could reward, he sets laws, and you need to comply. What is Amos Malchus if a melech has no authority? So Dina de Malchus Dina is the essence of Malchus, because Al Pi Torah, who rules the country? So Sanhedrin is responsible for Mishpat, for Tzedek, for Dinei Torah, but who is the ruler of the country? Malchus. The Rosh Hashanah, there's an amazing chiddush, and the Ran says the Melech not only rules the country, he also is a legislator, and the Melech is responsible to devise and implement a system of law and order, which complements Mishpat HaSanhedrin, Mishpat HaTorah. So the Ran in his drushes explains, no legal system could really be relevant if it's not updated. In America, for instance, there are amendments. There are constantly amendments. No legal system could be efficient unless it's from time to time updated. Society changes. There are new challenges and new difficulties. And so that is the tafkid of the Melech that Ran explains. Mishpat HaSanhedrin is fixed, but it needs to be filled in. There are social needs that aren't addressed by Torah. And that is the tafkid of the Melech. So Melech is all about din. Melech is about mishpat. That's Amos Malchus. So Dina de Malchus Dina is the essence of Malchus. So in Torah we find the din of Melech Yisrael. How would that apply to Malchei Umais? There's a very Parshat pasuk, Melech b'mishpat yamid eretz. And this pasuk doesn't refer to Malchi Yisrael Davka. Melech b'mishpat yamid eretz. So Melech is mishpat. And that is the essence of Dina D'Malchus Dina. So what's the machlokes of Rishonim? The way I understand it, the machlokes of Rishonim is how do we define Malchus? What is considered legitimate Malchus to whom we apply the din of Dina D'Malchus Dina? What is Malchus? Dina D'Malchus Dina is the essence of Malchus. Ein Malchus beli din. That's the essence of Malchus. Amos Malchus, Shetei Mosai Alecho. How do we define Malchus? What is considered legitimate Malchus? That is the machlokes Rishonim. According to the Rashbam, Tumas Hadeshen must be a Malchus that has the consent of the people. According to the Rana, the Rashba, no. The one that rules is the one that dictates the laws. We supply your needs. We are the administrative branch. So we also have the right to legislate. That is the opinion of the Rashba and the Ran. We don't need your consent. The fact you're living in this country and we care for your needs. We see to it that you have food and water and anything else that a country needs. And therefore, dinam din. So the way I understand it, the Rishonim don't explain the essence of the halach of Dina D'Malchus Dina. It's just two different approaches. How do we define Malchus? And what is considered legitimate Malchus to say that dinam din, that Dina D'Malchus Dina. And why is this so important to me? Because the classical understanding of both opinions wouldn't fit into any modern system today. So the Rashba and the Ran say, the country belongs to the king. According to international law, no country belongs to any king. Today, it is the most simple assumption, a country belongs to the people. Even dictators, they all argue, we represent the people. So I think North Korea officially is called the Democratic Republic of Korea. Very, very democratic, if you know anything about North Korea. Most countries in the world that officially are called the Democratic Republic, you know that those are the worst guys. Nothing about them is democratic. So do we say Dina D'Malchus Dina? So today, everyone agrees, and even those dictators claim to represent the will of the people. But no one would argue that a country belongs to a king. Why would a country belong to a king? Countries no longer belong to families, to kings, to presidents. Countries belong to the people. So according to the Ran and the Rashba, the entire concept wouldn't be relevant today, even according to the Rashbam. So the Rashbam says, if we live in a country, we agree to the rules. Why is that binding? Why is that binding? Yesterday I agreed and today I don't agree. I agree to most of the rules, but not to all of them. I think in every country, if you make a survey and a poll, do you like to pay income tax? No, I think most of the people would say, no, I don't want to pay income tax. I would rather keep the money to myself. So how do we understand the interpretation of the Rashbam and Tumas Hadeshen? We agreed. Who says we agreed? We agreed to most of the rules, but not to all of them. Yesterday we agreed, and today maybe not. So in democratic countries, you have elections, and it is very common that leaders are voted out and others are voted in. So why is this binding? So in my interpretation, it's a totally new approach. Dina D'Malchus Dina is the essence of Malchus. Etzem din Malchus dictates Dina D'Malchus Dina. The question is only, what is considered legitimate Malchus? And therefore, we need the general consent of the people. It is not that you agree to this law and you agree to that law. That is not binding. I agreed yesterday, I don't agree today. I agree to any law that is to my benefit, but not to any law which will cost me money. So my interpretation is not that Dina D'Malchus Dina is because you agree to the laws. Dina D'Malchus Dina is just the defining fact of what is legitimate Malchus. Malchus must be based on the consent of the people. Once you have the general consent of the people, you have the authority, full authority, whether they agree or not, because that is the essence of Malchus. And that is my interpretation of the Rash and the Ran. They don't mean that the land belongs to the king. It's not a legal term, the land belonging to the king, like real estate belongs to its owner. What it means is the one that rules, the one that's in control, Dina, he has the authority, because responsibility and authority are two sides of the same coin. And if you expect the Malchus to supply your needs and to wage your wars and to safeguard you, then that implies that you must follow their rules. These are two sides of the same coin, and that is what the way I would understand this machlokes. So why, according to the Rashi and the Ran, don't we say Dina de Malchus and Eretz Yisrael? Because essentially Malchus Yisrael is different than Malchi Weiss. Malchus Yisrael, lo Yisrael ani noisen lachem, avos ani noisen lachem. Malchus and Eretz Yisrael is more about serving the people. It's more about administration. Because the authority ultimately is in the hands of the Sanhedrin and in the hands of the Navi. The Navi speaks in the name of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. His words are binding. The Sanhedrin are the ones to punish, to reward. The Melech is more in an administrative position. And therefore, according to the Rashman, the Ran, and Eretz Yisrael, we don't say Dina de Malchus Dina. Din belongs to Sanhedrin, contrary to what I quoted before from the Ran. So up to this point, we just explained the fundamentals. Let's get into some details, at least some. This is a huge sugya, and our time is very limited. Especially these wonderful people sitting here, they have business to do. But they prefer to learn Torah. Shin Samech Ter Sif Aleph and Choshen Mishpat. That's a long sif. And fundamentally, the Ramon, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Beises are being all the different opinions. Some Rishonim maintain Dina de Malchus Dina is only relevant between the individual and the government and the Malchus. Has nothing to do with relationships between people amongst themselves. Dina de Malchus Dina means you need to pay taxes. You have rights and you have obligations. Dina de Malchus Dina is between the people and the government, the municipality, the governing bodies. But the Ramon maintains the opinion that Dina de Malchus Dina is also between individuals, companies, not only between the individual and the government. Even though the Ramon brings various different opinions, that is clearly his ruling. And the Ramon has an interesting Gemara called the V'shesh B'Anu Al Melech or Takones B'nei Medina. Takones B'nei Medina. Every law that is made to the benefit, to the well-being of the population is binding. That is Shin Samech Ter Sif Aleph. And I want to bring 4 different examples and sources in the Ramon. Siman Ayin Gimel, Gvias Choiv. The Ramon deals with Dina Mashkin. So you remember the Gemara's Bal Choiv Koine Mashkin. There's a concept of a Mashkin. So when a lender lends money to a borrower, sometimes he will want to have a lien on his house, or sometimes metaltal and shatel. And in Gemara, we have a concept of a mashkin. So I lent you money. I want some guarantee. So you gave me a watch. You know, it is told on the Divrei Chaim. The Divrei Chaim was the Amoid HaChesed, the Tzantzarov. So the story goes that never was there $1 in his home by night. Divrei Chaim said, by money, there's a din of noisar, psul lino. Any money that he had, he gave to aniyim. And when he went to sleep by night, there was never any money in the house. Every year of Shabbos, you need to ask people to give him money to be poida the leichters of Shabbos. What's a leichter? Candelabra, you know, because it was always given as a mashkin. He took loans to help aniyim. So every year of Shabbos, you need to pay the lender. He should have Neil Shabbos. So the Ramon brings that in some countries, Dina Malchus was that the lender cannot take full possession of a mashkin only after 12 months. Lefi halacha, there's no such halacha. Stam al voice 30 days passed, payday come. He didn't pay, you could take possession of the mashkin. The Rama says Dina de Malchus Dina. And if according to the law, you need to wait 12 months, you need to wait 12 months. That is not between the individual and the government. That is between people, between Reuven and Shimon, between Levi and Yehuda, and the Rama Paskins Dina de Malchus Dina. Kuf nun dalet sif yud ches. We're dealing with nizkei shchenim. So there is an entire system of halachas, what a neighbor may do and what he is not allowed to do. You can't open a window if that window is on top of your neighbor's chutzah. That is hezek riyah. The Rama says, cheskes chalonis depends on Dina Malchus, depends on the law of the land. And that is once again between Reuven and Shimon, and not between the individual and the Malchus. Reish Nun Tet Siv Zayin, we're dealing with Hashavas Aveda. So in Bava Metzia Chof Aleph, and in various different sugyas, Hamatzah Mezuta Shel Yom, Harei Shaloi. If the water of the sea, swept something into the ocean, and you put your life on the line, and you swam into the ocean, and you salvaged it, it's yours. Ramo says, according to the Malchus, you have to give it back to the previous owner. And Dina de Malchus Adini, you cannot keep it to yourself. Shinun Tes, Shinun Vav, Siv Zayin, is Dina Geneva V'Gzeila. According to Chazal, there's a concept of Yesh V'Shin Rishus. If the Balaam was Nisyayish and you gave it away to another person, it says, the Ramo says, that doesn't comply with Dina de Malchus, Dina de Malchus Adina. So in all these sources we see, according to Ramo, Dina de Malchus Adina is not only between the individual and the government, even between people. So the basic idea is called Dover Sheyesh Bo Takonas HaMedina. Comes along the Shach, Ayin Gimel Sif Kot Lametesh, regarding Dina Mashkon, and the Shach says, Dina de Malchus, when it's against Din Torah, Bottle Mevuta. Din Torah reigns supreme. And that's such a big pella, this Shach, because Dina de Malchus is always against Din Torah. If it's not against Din Torah, why do you need Dina de Malchus? Whenever we say Dina de Malchus, Dina, it's against Din Torah. The Gemara in Bava Kama says, how do we know Dina de Malchus, Dina? Because governments take away land from their owners. Every government in the world, according to every system, has the power. Takanot Chirum. If need be, we could confiscate land. Yes, you will be compensated, but they don't need your consent. It's a process. You can go to court, but governments do have the authority and power to confiscate land if need be. So the Gemara says, because they take away land, they build bridges, they build roads, and we use those roads. So isn't this against Din Torah? So the Chazon Ish, Lekutim Chushemish Betet Zayin, wonders about the Shach. So let me share with you my opinion in this fundamental question. Regarding Yerusha, no legal system in the world gives up Chor Pishnayim besides Torah Hashem. No legal system in the world puts sons before daughters. But Lefi Din Torah Ein B'mas B'mokam Bein. Chukas Rash B'chelik Daled Reish Nun Vav. This Rash was quoted by all the Poskim. Regarding Yerusha, Al Pi Halacha, Baal Yorishes Ishtoi. But according to Mishpat Amim, no, her children take inheritance, not her husband. So according to some legal systems, it's split 50-50. The husband takes 50%, the children take the other 50%. Chukas Rashba says, we will totally reject Mishpat Amim. And he harshly attacks those that Manichim Be'er Mayim Chaim, Lachsev Lehem Boris Nishborim. On the other hand, there's a tshuva in Rivash Simenun Beis. The Rivash also deals with Dina Yerusha, and he deals with the question of Acharecha. And that's a big sugya in Bava Basra. So number one has it till the day of his death. When he passed away, instead of this gift going to his Yerushim, it goes to Pliny. When the second person will pass away, it goes to number 3. So the Rivash writes in Simenum Beis, in our countries, we comply with Dina Malchus. And according to Dina Malchus, there is no Dina B'Harech. And the Rivash says, yes, we accept Din Malchus. The Tashbitz was a Talmud of the Rivash, but he was as great as Bar Plukta. Very strained relationship. We'll talk about another opportunity, not right now. Tashbitz Chelik Gimel Samach Aleph rejects the Rivash, and he says it's against the Rashba. The Rashba says that by Yerusha, we reject Dina Malchus. But I don't think the Tashbitz is right, because the Ramah in Choshen Mishpat quotes both the Rashba and the Rivash. So according to the Ramah, we must assume it's not a machlekes. Shin Samachtes, the Ramah brings the Rashba. The Reish Mem Chesi brings the Rivash. If this is a machlekes, how could he quote them both? So my opinion is this, and this is a Choshev Yesod. When Din HaMalchus claims to be more righteous, more moral, more ethical than Din Torah, we will reject Din HaMalchus. Don't dare to think you are more ethical and right than Torah Hashem. So according to Din HaMalchus, sons and daughters have the same rights. Why would a husband take his wife's inheritance and not leave it to her family? Why would a Bchor take Bishnayim? The Rashba says no. Din Torah reigns supreme. The Din HaMachrech was a technicality. It's not a moral principle. It's not that they are more ethical than we are. It's just a concept. And therefore, in that case, Din HaMalchus. So that would be my understanding. So when do we say Din Torah overrides Din Malchus? When we're dealing with fundamentals, ethical principles, not when we're dealing with details. One of the fundamental questions is, does Dina de Malchus apply only to Mominis or to other areas as well? And this was so problematic in the past year, the year of COVID-19, and it brought so much machlekes in our communities. So Dina de Malchus that is not about money, not about monetary issues, but it's still letakonas b'nei hamedina. That's the Agdara of the Ramah. Shin Samachtes. Letakonas b'nei hamedina. So I was once asked by a cheder. So we desperately need to open the cheder, but we still don't have a shiur from the fire department. But our mumchim say it's totally safe. It's just a technicality. We still don't have, a formal permit. What do we say, Dina de Malchus Dina? You can't open this cheder because it's against the law. And I think, yes, Dina de Malchus Dina. It's the Tekonas B'nei Medina. Traffic laws and regulations. It's not about money. Dina de Malchus Dina. I once was involved in a very painful case about adoption. We have no source in the Torah that there's a concept of adoption. Parents can't give away children. It's not a house or a car or an animal that you buy, that you purchase and you give away. You don't buy children, you can't give away children. But in every Medina Mitukenes, there are laws of adoption, because to our dismay, sometimes kids have the bad fortune to be born into families that are not functional. And society needs to care for those kids, for those children. Some children are born into families, if we won't care for them, they will die, or they wouldn't have a proper upbringing. So there are laws of adoption. Are those laws binding? I was once involved in a case. A mother had a baby out of wedlock, and she gave away the baby for adoption, and then she regretted it, and she found out who was the family, and she fought them. And in my opinion, Dina de Malchus Dina, because these laws sometimes are lifesavers, and it's Letakonas B'nei Medina. So I gave a few examples of the question of Dina de Malchus Dina when it was not dealing with monetary issues, but rather totally different areas. But the common denominator that's at the Shura, they are the Takonas B'nei Medina, and in my opinion, Dina de Malchus Dina is relevant and will apply. So today we discussed a fascinating sugya. And the first part of the shiur, we just spoke about the definitions and the hagdoras and the yesodis of this sugya, and then we went into some detail. When does this rule apply? So this week's parsha, we learn about Shiras HaBe'ero. And Bnei Yisrael said Shiran Be'ero Shel Miriam. And the Or Chaim HaKodesh asked a very well-known question. How is it? They said Shiran Be'ero Shel Miriam. They said Shiran An Kriyas Yam Suf Shiras Hayam. And again, Shiras HaBe'ero. How come they didn't say Shiran Kaboras HaTorah? Kaboras HaTorah is the most important event in the history of the world. Bereishis Boro Elikim B'Shul Yisrael Shenikreishis B'Shul Torah Shenikreishis. So they say Shira once and once again, and they didn't say Shira al Kaboras HaTorah. So the Chaim HaKodesh says, Torah Dim Shira LeBe'er. Shira Saber in a way is Shira HaTorah. But I wonder. So why is Shira HaTorah the Derech Remez? They actually said Shira LeBe'er, and they rely on us. We should know the Medrash at Torah Nim Shira LeBe'er. If we need to say Shira al Torah, we should say it explicitly, loud and clear. The Torah should say, Az, Yoshi Yisol, Shira Torah. Why b'derech remez? So I would say in the Kasha of the Or Chaim, we didn't say Shira al Torah because Torah in itself is Shira. Do you recall what is the pasuk, the mitzvah of Ksiva Sefer Torah? And this mitzvah doesn't apply only to Shiras Hazino. According to practically most of the early commentators, that's the mitzvah of Ksiva Sefer Torah. And Torah is called Shira. We not only learn Torah, we sing Torah, we rejoice in Torah. Simchas Torah and Chedves Adishmaitz are the most important simcha in the world. Torah is a shira. Ein oimrim shira al shira. It's exactly the reason ein oimrim brocha al brocha. Did it ever occur to you? And I wonder if it didn't. Why don't we say berachas ha-mitzvah on benching, on berachas ha-Torah? It's a mitzvah d'oraisa. We do say berachas ha-mitzvah, mitzvah shebedibur. We say a brocha on mikra megillah, even though it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So l'cha'oira, 3 times a day, when a person benches, he should say, and every day in the morning before saying Berachas HaTorah, we should say, we don't say so. The answer is a very simple one. We never say a brocha on a brocha. We could say a brocha on kriya, but we don't say a brocha on another brocha. And that's why there is no brocha on berachas HaTorah or berachas HaMazon. And in the same token, ein oimrim shira al shira. Torah in itself is shira. No need to say shira al shira. That is my feeling. But I also want to quote the Or Chaim HaKodesh. After all, I'm just the Mincha Social, the little one. He's the Or Chaim HaKodesh, the giant. So the Chaim says, Shiras HaBe'er, Shiras HaTorah. Torah Nim Shel LeBe'er. In what way is Torah Nim Shel LeBe'er? We find Posuk in Mishlei that refers to Torah. Shtei mayim eboicho, v'noizle mebe'echo, v'yafutzo mayim secho chutzo. It's noteworthy, interesting, in the very same Posuk, we have a reference to 3 different types of water sources, boyer, be'er, mayon. What is the difference between the 3? Boyeres mayim are water holes. You dig the hole, you dig the pit, and you pray for rain. And if rain doesn't come, you need to bring water to fill it up. Chilasa v'soifer b'dayoda. Be'er is a well. You dig a well. But you only dig a well if you could reach the water table. And then you have mei tahoim. You have natural water, and you don't need to fill that well. There are no wells in the desert because the water table is very deep down there. So, well as Tchilas v'Yoda v'Sofer v'Dei Shamayim, a Mayon kol kulo v'Dei Shamayim, that is a gift of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when the Torah speaks about the bounty and the blessing of Eretz Yisrael, Ayona is yotzem bebiko bebahar. Eretz nachlei mayim. Eretz nachlei mayim. So Nacholim and Mayonis are no need to work, no need to toil. Kol kulo b'dei shamayim. Torah's nibshal lebe'er. Many times young yeshiva boys come and they're so stressed out and they talk to me about the difficulty learning. We don't understand the Shiur, we don't have cheshek, we learn and we forget. And I always try to encourage them with this possible. Stage number 1 is Shtei Mayim Eboyecha. Yes, a lot of Yegia. It's not easy. But if you persist, stage number 2 will be V'noizlem Min Be'erecha. Sooner or later, you'll reach the water table. And then you will have water in plenty. And if you persevere and you learn Basmada, then you will have the Haftocha of Chazal, always a better Shema. Today, when I say Shiurim, it's not really hard on me. I don't need to prepare much. It just comes. I just need to decide what sugi to talk about. And I've learned so many sugyas, so it's not really very hard. So you just need to persist. Shtei mayim eboyecha, noizlem be'erecha, ve'afutzu may noisechu chutza. Torah nimshal lebe'er. So according to the Chaim, Shiras HaBe'er is also Shiras HaTorah. Yirotza, we should all be zeicha to sing Torah, to rejoice in Torah, to dance with the Torah. Simchas HaTorah, v'chedres l'shmatze, ki hi chayeichem. And the source of Talmud, we should be zeicha bekorev to Yeshua Seilomim, be as Goel Sedek, b'mehero, b'yomeinu, amen.